Imagine waking up one morning and discovering an entire American town is gone. Homes still furnished. Cars still parked. Dishes still sitting on tables. There was no evacuation order. No official disaster. No explanation. Just silence. Tonight, you're going to hear the true story of one American town that was abandoned almost overnight, and why, decades later, the U.S. government still won't give a clear answer. Stay with me, because what caused this town to disappear may still exist today. This town looked like thousands of others across America. It was a place woven into the fabric of the country, with small streets, modest homes, and that classic, tight-knit community feel. There was a school, a church, a local store where everyone knew your name. Families had lived here for generations. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Life moved slowly, safely. Nothing about this place suggested it would soon become one of America's strangest and most unsettling ghost towns. It was the kind of place you drive through and think, what a peaceful life. But beneath that calm surface, something was beginning to change. Something that no one could see, hear, or smell. A silent threat was creeping in, and the clock was ticking down to the moment everything would stop. Neighbors would later say it happened fast. One week, people were there, mowing their lawns, waving from their porches. The next, houses were empty. This wasn't a gradual decline, the kind you see when a local factory shuts down and people slowly move away over years. This was different. This was almost all at once. Imagine walking down a street you've known your whole life, and suddenly, every home is dark. The silence is what gets you first. No dogs barking, no kids laughing, just an eerie quiet. Inside these homes, it was even stranger. Furniture was left behind, perfectly arranged. Clothes were still hanging in closets, as if someone just stepped out to run an errand. Food was found rotting in refrigerators, a testament to how quickly people had vanished. It looked exactly like people walked out of their front doors one day and simply never came back. It was a scene frozen in time, a snapshot of a life that had been abruptly and completely interrupted. This wasn't a town moving on. This was a town being erased. The question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying. Where did they all go? And why did they leave everything behind? As investigators and the few remaining locals started piecing things together, the scene became even more bizarre. They found cars with keys still in the ignition, parked in driveways as if waiting for a driver who would never return. It was clear this wasn't a normal move. People don't leave behind their wedding photos, their family heirlooms, their pets. This was an act of sudden, desperate abandonment. And that's when the rumors started. In the absence of official answers, people began to fill in the blanks themselves. The theories spread like wildfire through the surrounding counties. Some locals believed the ground itself wasn't safe, that something toxic was seeping up from below. Others whispered that the air had become poisonous, an invisible killer that drove everyone away. The most common belief was that something unseen was slowly killing the town, and the residents had no choice but to flee for their lives. Adding fuel to the fire, many were convinced that the government knew far more than it was admitting. Official explanations were vague and unsatisfying, talking about economic downturns or population shifts. But that didn't explain the haste, the panic, the abandoned lives. And then, something even more suspicious happened. The official records, town meeting minutes, environmental reports, public health surveys, they started disappearing too. Years later, after the town had been left to rot, a new generation of independent researchers and journalists started digging. They uncovered something deeply disturbing. Situated not far from the town were old industrial operations, relics from an era of booming production and almost non-existent regulation. These facilities had been involved in manufacturing processes that we now know produce incredibly dangerous byproducts. Alongside these plants were forgotten sites of unregulated waste disposal. Trenches, pits, and leaking barrels filled with a cocktail of chemicals had been buried and forgotten decades earlier. What we now call hazardous, toxic, and cancer-causing was once considered a normal, acceptable part of doing business. The concept of long-term environmental contamination wasn't really understood, or more accurately, it was ignored. And whatever leaked from these forgotten industrial graveyards, it was silent, it was invisible, and it was long-lasting. It seeped into the soil, it poisoned the groundwater, and it crept into the very foundations of the town, day after day, year after year, without anyone ever knowing. The threat wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, creeping poison. Now, here's where the story gets darker, where negligence turns into something that feels a lot more sinister. Newly unearthed documents, memos, and internal correspondence suggest that some officials knew there was a problem. They had reports, they had data, they had early warnings from scientists. They knew something was wrong with the environment around the town, but they didn't fully grasp how serious it was, or they chose not to. Ordering a full-scale public evacuation would have meant causing a panic. It would have triggered immediate, massive lawsuits from sick residents. It would have meant admitting corporate and governmental responsibility, a price tag that could run into the billions. So instead of sirens and public warnings, a different strategy was deployed. It was quiet, subtle, and chillingly effective. Families were quietly encouraged to leave. They were told it was for their own good, that better opportunities were elsewhere. Their property was bought up, often for pennies on the dollar, by anonymous holding companies. The town didn't die with a bang. It was dismantled piece by piece, family by family. It faded from the map without ever making national headlines, without a single news anchor reporting on the tragedy. It was a managed disappearance, orchestrated to avoid accountability. Years later, the true cost became tragically clear. Among the scattered former residents, unusual patterns of illness began to emerge. Cancer rates, respiratory diseases, and rare neurological disorders appeared at a frequency that was statistically impossible to ignore. Families who had once been neighbors now shared a bond of grief and sickness. When they went to doctors with their medical questions, they were met with confusion. The symptoms were often vague, the causes unknown. There was no single clear answer. When they sought compensation, they hit a wall. The legal battles were long, expensive, and emotionally draining. Compensation was limited, if it came at all. And the town? It was left to decay. Nature began to reclaim it. Vines crawled over homes, streets cracked and filled with weeds. And the schoolhouse that once echoed with the sounds of children became a hollow, silent shell. The town became a tombstone for a community that was sacrificed for profit and convenience. This brings us to the questions that remain, haunting the empty streets of this forgotten place. Why was there no national alert? In an age of mass communication, how could an entire town be quietly erased without anyone raising the alarm? Why were the records sealed or destroyed? What information was so damaging that it had to be buried forever? And why, to this day, has there been no official apology, no full explanation, no memorial to the people who lost their homes, their health, and their history? All that's left are the empty streets, the decaying buildings, and the heavy silence of unanswered questions. This wasn't ancient history. This happened in modern America, in a time of scientific progress and supposed government oversight. And it proves one deeply uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most dangerous disasters aren't loud, they aren't explosive, and they don't come with sirens. They come quietly and visibly, in the water we drink and the air we breathe. They come disguised as progress and prosperity. And by the time people realize the true cost, it's already too late. The story of this town is a warning. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats are the ones we are told not to worry about. If this story shocked you, and you want to hear more of the true American stories they never taught you in school, make sure you subscribe. Because history didn't just disappear. It was buried, and we're here to start digging. Thanks for watching.